Hello YouTube, this is OBIS. Thank you for joining me for another sound design tutorial. In this week's episode, we'll be taking a look at how to design a Melbourne bounce style bass in Ableton using Operator. If you're not familiar with Operator, it's a plugin that it comes stock with Ableton. It's fairly straightforward. It's an FM synthesizer. It has 4 oscillators. In this tutorial, we're going to be using it as a subtractive synthesizer. So any subtractive synth you have, you could follow along. And if you don't, just download the 30-day trial. Or if you're an Ableton user, then you're good to go. And here's how we get started. Let's play the sound, and I'll show you what we're going to be making. Okay, so that's the bass. It's a, deep registered, kind of tight, snappy kind of bass, and it does have a sub layered beneath it, which I'll show you how to make that as well once we make the initial patch. So it's get started. Let's hit Control-Shift-T in Ableton, or Command-Shift-T if you're using Apple to make a new MIDI track. Let's drag over our previous MIDI clip that I just showed you for the example. We won't be needing this track, the previous one, so we're gonna just mute it and bring it off to the side. We have our blank MIDI track with our MIDI clip, which is basically just a bass patch I made, which does have a little bit of pitch bend in it. And in Operator, we're gonna set that up so we can get the right drop in pitch as far as semitones or octave range goes, because it doesn't come set up that way. So let's get started. Let's head over to our instruments category. Let's open up an instance of Operator. Now we have a blank instance of Operator. We might want to bring our volume a bit down for this at first. And let's just play this example back. Okay, so as you notice, we just have a default sine wave at first, which basically just sounds kind of like a sub or a bass. So let's get started. First thing we want to do is go to our global tab over here on the bottom right, and you see it's an FM synthesizer, so you have different algorithms. If you hit these different block settings, you get different formations as far regarding how the operators, these are called. They're not actually called oscillators, they're called operators in an FM synth, and how these interact with each other. But in this case, if you go over to the far right, this set of horizontal 4 blocks, this actually sets up Operator to use these 4 operators and turns them into oscillators. So you can use this as a subtractive synth. And let's get started. So pitch, let's bring this up to 12 so that when we do our pitch bend automations, as I showed you earlier, it'll be accurate as far as in tone. You usually want to go in even increments of octaves or 12, so 12, 24 semitones, and so on. In this case, 12 should do it. It's a bass, so you want to go to voices while we're in the global tab, and let's go over to one voice so that we're not going to be playing any chords with this. It's just the bass. Next thing, let's go to our first oscillator. Let's go to Oscillator. If you're in the envelope mode, just switch to Oscillator. I happen to be. It usually comes default in the Oscillator window. So make sure Shell 1 or Oscillator 1 is enabled. And you see this pencil tool that comes up over here. We're going to be using this in a moment. Go over to Wave. Let's pick a standard saw wave. So let's go to Saw D. And let's just kind of vary the waveform a bit with this pencil tool. As you see, when you click and drag there, you can alter you can just draw in and draw out frequencies and harmonics. So it just changes and makes the waveform a bit more interesting than a standard saw. So let's try that a little bit. Okay, just makes it a little more interesting, a little more gritty, which is kind of what we want. We're looking for kind of a little more metallic, a little more gritty sound, because once we start doing the filter cutoff, you'll see where that goes. So for that, let's go to our decay. We want to make this oscillator's overall, the shape of the envelope, amplitude envelope. So to do that, you just click this little box. This is envelope. And we want to make this a little shorter, a little more snappier. So let's just do that by bringing down our decay. And you won't hear anything there until you bring down your sustain all the way. And you can basically just control the length of your decay, how long, how short you want it, by dragging this in and out. So let's just, we want it fairly tight, at least for this oscillator. So let's just bring it down to, less than 200. Okay, we can bring up our level a bit. Let's bring it up to about 9. Okay, next thing you want to do is head over to Oscillator 2. Let's head over to our wave. Let's pick a square D this time. And let's carve out a little bit of the harmonics again with this pencil tool. We want to bring up the level so we can hear it. Another thing you might want to do is head over to our chorus, and this controls the pitch or the octave. So let's bring this one down, and let's actually bring oscillator 1 up to 2. So we have some variation in the pitch. Let's see how that sounds. Okay, so it's starting to sound gritty, and the way the pitches interact with each other, it's getting in the ballpark of what we're trying to look for. Now we want a little bit low end body, and as I mentioned before, we are going to split the frequencies to make a sub, but regardless of that, you also want a little low end in the initial patch, so that when you cut it off, you still keep that body, if that makes any sense. So let's head over to this oscillator 3. We'll keep it on a sine wave, and let's bring the level up. So we'll just keep it a few decibels less than these two, but it's still in there for presence. You can keep the pitch where it's at, so that all three of these are in different pitches. In this case, we don't need oscillator D. We could use it, but we're just going to deactivate it. Okay, so the next thing you want to do is head over to our filter section, and we want to set up our filter cutoff amount, and we also want to set up the envelope itself that is going to be controlled. So over here we have envelope enabled. You see the standard pitch envelope. You have your frequency section here. Right now it's currently set to the clean filter algorithm. We have a few other options down here. Let's just pick MS2. Let's vary it up. It's slightly different. They're all more or less the same. Nothing too drastically different. It's just, kind of different hardware emulations that Ableton has designed. And, they actually sound pretty good. This comes with the newer versions of Live. The previous versions, like 8 and all that stuff definitely didn't have these. So anyways, so frequency, let's sweep this down. And here, let's hear that with it. We want to sweep it down to a register where we just hear it, because we're going to be sweeping this up with a frequency cutoff envelope. Okay, somewhere around there, 188 I had, so I mean, you don't have to follow this to the T, but roughly around, I would say under 200, around, under 250 for sure. Just so you'll have a pronounced filter cutoff when we set up this envelope right now. Let's head over to our decay, and let's bring this up to, let's see. I would say under 900. 900, under 900, under 1,000. And to hear this, let's bring up the envelope amount. And you do that, you see envelope, and there's a 0%. So by default, it's at 0. Let's bring this up, and we're gonna start to hear the filter envelope being introduced. Let's bring it to release just a bit. Okay, so we're getting in the ballpark. We're not done yet. I want to add a little more of a snappy kind of punch to this sound. We could do that in Operator by going to the pitch section, which is located right below the filter shell and right above global shell. Hit this square so it turns blue. Now you've activated it. Over here you have your destinations. You have all 4 of your operators, or oscillators in this case, A, B, C, D. We're not using D, so we could just deactivate that. We're not using the LFO for this sound, so we could deactivate that as well. You could leave them on as well, but in this case, just to show you what we're really focusing on, it doesn't affect the sound since we're not using them. Okay, so that's what we have right now. The pitch has not affected the sound yet. So what you want to do to hear the effect of the pitch is bring up this slider. So let's bring it up roughly halfway or more. Well, okay. So now you have a dramatic pitch bend. You don't want that. So to do that, you have to adjust the shape of the envelope, of the pitch envelope. So let's go to decay. And we'll bring this down. Let's see. We want it kind of short. Okay, so like roughly, I would say, 61.4 is the setting I have here. It sounds pretty good to me. You could always adjust it to taste. And let's see, maybe make a shorter release. Okay, and let's hear how that sounds so far with the previous example. Okay. Let's just bring up this tone knob a bit. This just adjusts the color slightly to the higher register. If you bring it down, it kind of alters the color of the whole entire synth. It's a very subtle effect. You don't even have to do this. I'm just doing it just to make the sound a little different. Okay. Next thing you can do is group this by hitting Control and G, because as I mentioned before, this sounds nice and full bodied, and if you wanted to, you can just use this as your sound and do some EQ and you'd be fine. But if you really want to get technical with it and more flexible and more proper with it, I would, at least make a sub, separate the frequencies, because it gives you more, like I mentioned, flexibility, and it's going to be cleaner in the mix, because you could put a little bit reverb, a little bit distortion on this, as I'm going to show you, and it won't affect the sub. So let's get started. So I hit Control and G in Ableton, or Command G if you're using Apple. We group this into its own instrument rack, as you can see by the little frame surrounding it now. We're going to hit the second little circle of these 3, which is the chain view. We're going to rename this top, because this is going to be the top layer. Let's duplicate this by hitting Control G or Command G. Let's rename this one sub, just so we don't get confused. And let's also color it something different. Let's put like a bright green. Okay, so we don't get confused. We're going to double click the sub. And if you remember, on a third oscillator, we used a sine wave, which would be good for a sub. The first 2, we used a square and a saw. We won't be needing those for the sub. chains. So let's just bring the level down. Make sure you're in your sub chain by double clicking. It's easy to get confused because if you single click, you're not fully selecting it sometimes, and you might get thrown off when you're editing. So just, double click, single click, whatever you have to do. Just make sure you're in the right window. So you're in sub. You turn down the levels of the first two oscillators since we're not using them, and you essentially just left this one. So let's solo it and let's listen for our sub. Okay, now that sounds like a sub, but if you really want to check, you want to go to audio effects, and let's pull out a spectrum. Now you can see that's 87 hertz. Now if you're doing like rock music or stuff like that, that would be a good sub. But in this case, in EDM, that's a little too high. So what we want to do is go over to our course or pitch of Oscillator 3, and let's bring it down by an octave. Alright, so right there we're about bang on around like 40 hertz. Perfect. That's basically the sub frequencies that you want. And you can always open up the frequency cutoff as well, just to have all those sub frequencies coming through. Another thing you want to do is drag in an EQ. So let's go to audio effects. Let's drag in an EQ8 to our subchain. I think it went into the top. Yeah, it did. So let's just cut it. Well, we need one there anyway, so let's just add another one in here. We're going to go to our first node, and we're going to low cut. Let's do our sharpest low cut. It's a brick wall. So that's the one. See, this is our standard low cut. This is the brick wall. It has a little asterisk and a little, or it's a times 4 actually. So let's just get that, and we're going to drag that to about 40 hertz. So you can hit control or command while you're dragging just to do finer increments. All right, so 40 hertz. Let's go to our fourth node, and we are going to high cut this one. Let's do the times 4 high cut as well, and we're going to bring this one down to, I would say, anywhere under 200 hertz, because you won't be needing anything in the high register for this particular sound, the sub. Another thing you want to do is drag a utility onto the sub, and over here under width, let's just bring it down to 0. Let's drag this to the beginning of the chain. So we want to keep this in 100% mono. So let's go to our top. Let's solo it. Now we have our EQ 8 already in there. If you don't, just drag in a new EQ into it, into your top. Let's go, and we're going to low cut it. We're going to put a brick wall, or the 4x4 low cut. And let's just drag this up. I don't know, let's hear it with it. Let's keep it there for now. Let's hear it with the sub. Okay, so we're basically in the ballpark. Another thing you want to do is let's add a little saturation. Let's make the top layer, just stand out just a bit more from the sub. So let's do that. Let's add a little saturator, a little saturation. Let's add the saturator plugin. So let's increase the drive a bit. Let's do, about 3-4 dB. Let's change it from analog clip to wave shaper. Hit this little upside down triangle and it expands your options for saturator. And over here under curve, let's bring this up. Let's bump it up and let's hear how it sounds. Okay, so it's just a subtle effect. It makes it a little sharper, adds a little some harmonics in the higher registers. And let's just hear that as a whole again. Alright, so that's basically the bass sound. I will save this rack as a preset and I will include it in the description below. So once again, I'll show you the sound soloed and then I'll play the tutorial out with a preview of the beat I made. So thank you guys, I appreciate it, and please subscribe and enjoy and stay tuned for more videos. Thanks guys.